Hi, and welcome to BizTech's APAC Cybersecurity Show. Every week, we update the region on the latest threats and incidences to help you protect yourselves better. As always, we have my co-host, Benjamin Ang, who's the head of Cyber and Homeland Defense at the Center of Excellence of the National Security at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at the Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. But today, we are also joined by Lauro Burkart. He's the Director of Cybersecurity Services at Sygnia. Now, gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. Good to be back.
Thank you.
Hi, Lauro. Nice to meet you.
Hi, good to be here.
Now, Lauro, ransomware attacks by organized groups such as Ragnar Locker are responsible for numerous high-profile attacks in the Asia-Pacific region. Now, this obviously causes significant financial losses and business disruptions. Could you give us a sense of who these sort of actors are and what they do?
Absolutely, yeah. So Ragnar Locker is in itself a very highly sophisticated and notorious ransomware group. Right? They've been known for their advanced techniques and the double extortion tactics, where they basically threaten to publicly release some of the stolen data unless the victim pays. Right? And that tactic has been particularly devastating for businesses in the APAC region, where we have seen a lot of financial losses and business disruptions. Right? What sets Ragnar Locker apart from others is that they're actually trying to target critical infrastructure, which is a sector that's much more difficult to attack and to deploy ransomware. And that's why it's usually not chosen as a target. And I think they try to focus on that. Over the last 3 years, they have at least 52 different entities that they've attacked across 10 different sectors globally.
Now, could you give us some insights then into the modus operandi of Ragnar Locker in this region? I mean, what do they actually do? Like you said, there's 50-something attacks, but what do they actually do, and what sort of dollars and cents are we looking at in terms of what they're asking for?
Sure. So, I mean, Sygnia itself, we have direct insight into actually one specific case in this region where we helped to manage a crisis for a client in APAC that was under attack by Ragnar Locker. But we have seen that these tactics and techniques have been deployed across the globe and in different regions. So what they do is usually start with accessing and exploiting vulnerabilities in public internet-facing services, such as unpatched VPNs, simple access points to get into the organization. And then they use existing system logs to discover some assets in the network and look at event logs to understand which ones are the privileged users that they can go after and start launching an attack. And what's interesting here is that these are actually exactly the same techniques that are used by forensics investigators when they would go and look for supporting victims of such an attack, right? So they're kind of leveraging those techniques used by the good guys and leverage them in order to launch attacks.
Lauro, that's terrifying news. Could you give us an example of who are the critical infrastructure companies that have been hit by this so that the audience gets a better idea of who's at risk?
As you might know, in our business, we're not at liberty to disclose any of that, right? But there are reports written actually by the CIA as well that are publicly accessible, and there's information on there. But of course, I can't provide insights into whom we're dealing with, right? There's a confidentiality aspect there.
Okay, then what are some of the... Sorry, Ben, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah. Talking about maybe the types of industries. Are we talking about like power supplies, water supplies, airports, telecommunications providers, hospitals? Are these the kind of targets?
Yeah, absolutely. So these are the typical critical infrastructure that are deemed and defined as critical infrastructure sectors, right? Starting with, as you mentioned, power supply, electrical infrastructure, water infrastructure, but also critical transportation hubs, airports, ports, right? We have oil pipelines, right? The Colonial Pipeline has been an example. So there's different type of attacks on critical infrastructure that have been happening by Ragnar Locker, but also, of course, by other ransomware groups.
Now, then, I want to ask Lauro this. I mean, companies make a lot of mistakes when it comes to protecting themselves. Give us a sense of what we should be avoiding.
I think that there's a few simple things to focus on and to kind of do as basic hygiene measures in order to protect yourself, right? Such as updating your systems on a regular basis and making sure that the critical internet-facing systems are updated with priority. blocking any unauthorized access for remote administration tools to make sure that there's no one with an admin tool coming in from the outside. Of course, implementing two-factor authentication, making sure that all systems that are internet-facing at least have that. Limiting actually the outbound access of servers, right? That makes sure that no data can actually leave the organization unwanted. And then, of course, implementing privileged identity management solutions. In our blog post on Ragnar Locker, we have actually also published some methods on how to proactively hunt for that group and identify that, right? So you can see that on our webpage, and that's quite an interesting blog post. We understand at Sygnia sort of the severity of these ransomware attacks in general, and we need to be very proactive in putting in the right measures in place, right? Our team can support organizations in helping them to not just better understand the security posture and understand the weaknesses and gaps they might have, but also making sure that they are prepared for a crisis by having an end-to-end crisis management program in place.
Lauro, how can an Asian business that's working in the critical infrastructure sector get themselves prepared, as you're talking about, because they may not have the internal resources to, or cybersecurity team in-house to actually do this preparation? What would you suggest?
So one of it is definitely to work with the right partner and make sure you have your partner in place to give you the right consultancy advice to what to do. Some of the measures I've actually mentioned are some of those key things to put in place, and they don't necessarily take a lot of effort, right? There are a lot of financial means to implement. These are basic hygiene measures, but then also a plan ahead for a crisis and making sure you have those partners in place and you're able to really go through the plan of a crisis in advance, simulate that, have maybe a tabletop exercise, have a war game in place that can help you really simulate such a situation and think through the critical points that you need to think through in a situation of a crisis, the different decision points, the different dilemmas that you're going to face at all levels, starting from the top level board and CEO and the C-suite that need to think through such scenarios, all the way down to the technical teams that need to face such a crisis.
I see. So we definitely need to work with good partners. Do you think that other Asian businesses who are not critical infrastructure can rest easy that they won't be targets, which is a misconception I think that many businesses have?
You're absolutely right. They are for sure a target. In the end, in today's age, it's really rather a matter of when you get attacked as opposed to if you get attacked, and you need to be ready and prepared for such an attack, right? While Ragnar Locker might be focusing on critical infrastructure, there's of course a lot of other ransomware groups out there which are highly professional, sophisticated crime games that will be launching attacks, of course, on any kind of organization, right?
Lauro, this has been a fascinating conversation. And one of my key takeaways is really around, whether we are a large or a small organization, we need to war game and do scenario planning and prepare for this, because actually not enough people have told us that message has not gone out. We shouldn't be responding to the crisis. We should be looking at pre-planned scenarios and then work to a playbook.
Absolutely.
I think that's a critical thing, the key takeaway from me for today from this show. Lauro, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Ben, thanks a lot for coming on this show as well.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here.
We've been speaking to Benjamin Ang, Head of Cyber and Homeland Defense at the Center of Excellence for National Security at the NTU, and Lauro Burkart. He's the Director for Cybersecurity Services, APAC, at Sygnia, on BizTech's APAC Cybersecurity Show. I'm Brian Fernandez. This interview will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.